everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today's topic is something that I think a lot of you out there will connect with, especially those of you in the business world, academics, or really just anyone interested in well-being. I came across this fascinating podcast, and it got me thinking we need to take a deep dive into it.
Oh, yeah. What's the topic?
It's all about the connection between mental well-being and success.
Interesting. We often hear these two things talked about as if they're totally separate, right?
Exactly. Like, to succeed, you have to push yourself to the limit, even if it means ignoring your mental health along the way.
No pain, no gain, suffer now, succeed later, all that. Yeah.
But this podcast flips that idea completely on its head. It argues that taking care of our mental health is actually crucial to unlocking our full potential.
So it's not about pushing through the pain, it's about finding a sustainable path.
Exactly. And they brought on some really interesting guests to talk about it. There's a medical doctor who's also an entrepreneur and a clinical psychologist who works with businesses.
Sounds like they have a unique perspective on this whole thing.
They do. And one of the most powerful parts is when this doctor actually shares his own personal story about burning out.
I think in a culture that glorifies working all the time, we forget that rest and self-care are essential.
Right. It's not just about being lazy or indulgent. It's about taking care of yourself so you can actually achieve sustainable success.
And this doctor, he learned that the hard way.
So what happened? What led to his burnout?
Well, he was working these incredibly long hours at his clinic, skipping meals, barely sleeping.
Oh, the classic signs.
Exactly. But he thought he was just being dedicated. Then, he ended up collapsing from exhaustion. That was his wake-up call.
It's so easy to get caught up in that go, go, go mindset and think we're invincible.
Right.
And then our bodies and minds are like, nope.
Yeah, this podcast really emphasizes how common these experiences are.
Especially in today's world, right?
We're constantly bombarded with pressure.
Financial worries, fear of failing, comparing ourselves to everyone on social media.
And they even share the story about an entrepreneur who was so crippled by self-doubt that he almost shut down his entire business.
It's a good reminder that we all struggle, even those who appear outwardly successful.
It's true.
So, okay, these mental health challenges are clearly widespread, but what can we actually do about them?
Well, what's cool about this podcast is that it doesn't just focus on the problems. It provides some practical solutions.
Okay, I like that.
They call it a mental strength toolkit.
Mental strength toolkit. What's in this toolkit?
Well, one of the most surprising yet powerful tools they offer is this idea that rest is productive.
Wait, rest is productive? In a world that tells us to hustle harder and never stop, that sounds almost revolutionary.
I know, right? But they argue that taking breaks can actually boost our productivity and creativity.
So it's not just about pushing through until you drop.
Nope. And get this, they even cite examples of super successful people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates who prioritize downtime.
Really? I always assumed people like that were working around the clock. But how do they make it work?
Well, they talk about structuring downtime strategically. They discuss this concept of ultradian rhythms.
Yeah.
Have you heard of those?
Ultradian rhythms.
Yeah. They're like these natural cycles of energy and recovery that our bodies go throughout the day. So by aligning our work with those rhythms, we can actually optimize our energy and get more done.
So it's not just about the amount of rest you get, but the quality and timing.
Exactly.
I'm already rethinking my schedule. Okay, so tell me more about these ultradian rhythms. How do they work exactly?
So basically, our brains can only intensely focus for about 90 to 120 minutes before needing a break.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And those breaks, they don't even have to be long. Even 5 or 10 minutes can help you recharge. Then, of course, you need enough sleep.
Right, of course.
That's crucial for our brains to consolidate memories and recharge for the next day. They even talk about napping as a tool for boosting creativity.
I'm going to have to try that. But I have to admit, taking breaks even when I know I should, it's hard.
Yeah, I get it. Especially when you feel that pressure to be constantly producing, right?
Yeah. Did they talk about that at all?
They did. They highlight the importance of shifting our mindset around rest. Instead of viewing it as something we have to earn, they say we need to see it as an investment.
Oh, I like that.
An investment in our productivity and well-being. And there's actually research to back that up. Even short breaks can improve focus and reduce stress.
That is encouraging. Okay, so about rest is productive. What other tools are in this mental strength toolkit?
Well, another key one they emphasize is mind your thoughts.
Mind your thoughts. What do they mean by that?
They're talking about how our thoughts can literally shape our reality. Like if we're constantly bombarded by negative self-talk, it's going to impact our confidence, our decisions, ultimately our outcomes.
Oh yeah, that inner critic can be brutal. But just telling ourselves to think positive doesn't always cut it, does it?
Exactly. So they dive into this technique called cognitive reframing that's used in cognitive behavioral therapy. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I think so.
So it's all about recognizing those negative thought patterns and then consciously choosing to replace them with something more helpful.
Oh, okay. So you're actively engaging with your thoughts rather than just letting them run wild.
Right. But of course, that takes self-awareness, which is something they also talk about.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. How do they suggest we develop that self-awareness?
They give a few practical techniques. One is called thought challenging.
Okay.
And it's all about asking yourself some tough questions. Is this thought really true? What's the evidence? Is there a more realistic way to look at this?
That's interesting. Like you're putting your thoughts on trial.
Exactly. It's about becoming more objective. Another technique they mention is cognitive restructuring. That's where you identify the core belief that's driving that negative thought and then reframe it as something more empowering.
Okay, that sounds pretty powerful, but also maybe a bit intense. Did they acknowledge that it takes work to change those deep-seated beliefs?
They did. They emphasized the importance of consistency and self-compassion.
Okay, good.
Like it's okay to stumble. The key is to keep practicing.
Yeah, it's a journey, not a destination.
Right. It takes time to build new neural pathways in your brain.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got rest, cognitive reframing.
Yeah.
What else is in this mental strength toolkit? I think they mentioned something about healthy habits, right?
Yeah. This is where the clinical psychologist in the podcast really shines. They talk about how important our physical well-being is for our mental state.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know when I'm sleep deprived or not eating well, my mood definitely takes a hit.
Of course. They emphasize the importance of those basics: sleep, nutrition, exercise. But they connect them directly to our mental and emotional well-being.
Right, it's all connected. But did they go beyond just listing those healthy habits? I'm curious to hear their take on how those things actually impact our mental state.
Oh, they do. For instance, they explain how chronic sleep deprivation can actually worsen anxiety. Make it harder to focus and make decisions. And they also get into the link between nutrition and mood.
So like what we eat really affects how we feel.
Yeah. They say that a diet rich in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains can actually give our brains the nutrients they need to function at their best.
It's like giving your brain premium fuel instead of running on empty. What about exercise? I know it's good for us physically, but how does it affect our minds?
They talk about how exercise releases endorphins, which have mood-boosting effects.
Right, those feel-good chemicals.
Yeah. And practically speaking, it can be a great way to manage stress and anxiety. Even something simple like a walk or a yoga class.
I love that. It's amazing how powerful those simple acts of self-care can be. So we've covered rest, managing our thoughts, healthy habits. What's the final piece of this toolkit?
The final piece they highlight is community.
Oh, community. We've talked about that a lot on this show.
It's so important. They argue that having a supportive network is crucial for navigating the challenges of, well, anything really.
Right. It's easy to feel isolated when you're going through something tough. But building that community can be a challenge in itself, especially if you're more introverted. Did they offer any specific advice on how to do that?
Yeah, they emphasize the importance of being intentional about it, like seeking out mentors, joining groups with like-minded individuals, and nurturing those relationships authentically.
So it's about finding your people, the ones who get it.
Exactly. And one more crucial point they made. Seeking help is a sign of strength. Whether it's talking to a friend, a mentor, or a therapist, asking for support is essential.
Yeah, sometimes we forget that. It's like we think we have to do everything on our own.
Exactly.
It's so refreshing to hear these ideas presented in such a practical way. This podcast really does provide a roadmap for not just surviving, but thriving in today's world.
And one of the biggest takeaways for me is that taking care of our mental health isn't just a nice to have, it's essential for achieving any kind of lasting success.
Yeah, it's not a luxury, it's a necessity.
Totally agree.
It's amazing how this podcast really ties everything together, mental health and success. Like you can't have one without the other. But I gotta say, I'm still kind of stuck on this whole rest is productive thing. I get it in theory, but in practice, it just feels counterintuitive, you know?
I know, right? It goes against everything we've been taught about success, but they actually back it up with science.
Oh, okay. Tell me more.
Well, they explain how chronic stress can mess with your brain, Like literally, it impairs cognitive function. It makes you less productive and even increases your risk of physical health problems down the road.
It's like this domino effect.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk more about this Mind Your Thoughts tool. That seems to be where a lot of people struggle.
Oh, absolutely. They really emphasize how powerful our thoughts are. Like if you're constantly thinking negative thoughts, it's going to show up in your life.
Yeah. It's like that saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. But how do you actually change those negative thoughts? Just telling yourself to think positive doesn't always work.
Right. It's not that simple. They talk about this technique called cognitive reframing. It's from cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay.
It's about identifying those negative thought patterns and then choosing to replace them with more balanced, helpful thoughts.
So you're not ignoring the negative thoughts, you're actively engaging with them.
Exactly. But that takes a lot of self-awareness.
I was just going to ask about that. How do we develop that self-awareness?
Well, they give some pretty specific techniques. One is thought challenging.
Thought challenging.
Yeah. Basically, you ask yourself these questions. Is this thought really true? What evidence do I have? Is there a more realistic way to look at this situation?
It's like you're putting your thoughts on trial.
Yes. You're forcing yourself to be more objective. They also mention cognitive restructuring. That's where you pinpoint the core belief behind the negative thought and then actively reframe it.
Okay, that sounds powerful, but also it takes some serious work.
Yeah, changing those deep-seated beliefs definitely takes time and effort.
Did they talk about that?
They did. They really stressed the importance of being patient with yourself and not giving up. It's okay to mess up sometimes. The key is to keep practicing.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to get discouraged when you don't see results right away. Okay, so rest, cognitive reframing. What else is in this mental strength toolkit? What about those healthy habits they mentioned?
Yeah, the healthy habits part is where the clinical psychologist perspective really comes in. They explain how our physical health plays a huge role in our mental well-being.
Yeah, it makes sense. When I don't get enough sleep or eat right, I definitely feel it mentally. Did they give specific examples of how those things impact our mental state?
Oh yeah, like they explained how not getting enough sleep can actually make anxiety worse.
Really?
And it makes it harder to focus and think clearly.
Wow, makes sense.
And they also talked about the connection between nutrition and mood. Like a diet full of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, all that good stuff, it can give your brain what it needs to function at its best.
It's like giving your brain the premium fuel.
Exactly.
Okay, what about exercise? I know it's good for the body, but how does it affect our minds?
Well, they highlighted how exercise releases endorphins.
Oh yeah, those feel-good chemicals.
Right. It can be a really healthy way to deal with stress and anxiety. Even just going for a walk or doing some yoga can make a difference.
It's incredible how these simple things can have such a big impact. So we've got rest, cognitive reframing, healthy habits. What's the final piece of this toolkit?
The final piece is community.
Community, yeah. We've talked a lot about the importance of that before. It's not always easy to build, though, especially if you're someone who's more on the introverted side.
Right.
Did they give any advice on how to do that?
They really emphasized being proactive about it. Things like finding mentors, joining groups with people who share your interests.
Oh, finding your tribe. That's important.
And also being real, being vulnerable in those relationships. It's about creating a space where you feel comfortable sharing your struggles and your successes.
I love that. And it makes me think of that Brené Brown quote about vulnerability being the birthplace of connection. You have to let yourself be seen, you know?
Exactly. And another point they made that's really important is that seeking help, whether it's from a friend, a mentor, or a therapist, it's a sign of strength.
Yeah, it's not a weakness to ask for help.
It's actually incredibly powerful.
I think it's so great how this podcast gives us all these practical tools. It's not just about think positive or work harder. It's about real strategies for building mental resilience.
Right. It's like a permission slip to take care of yourself.
Exactly.
And for me, one of the biggest takeaways is that taking care of your mental health is not just a bonus. It's actually essential for achieving any kind of true, lasting success.
That's a good point. It's not about sacrificing your well-being for success. It's about integrating the two.
Exactly.
I love that. So how do we apply this idea of sustainable success, not just to our work, but to our whole lives? That's something I think we all need to consider.
It is a great question.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking about sustainable success. It's not just about those external markers of achievement, right?
It's deeper than that. It's about building a life that actually feels fulfilling. aligned with your values.
It's about finding that sweet spot where you can pursue your goals with passion, but also, without burning yourself out.
Without sacrificing your health, your relationships, all of that.
This podcast really made me rethink my own definition of success, putting my well-being front and center, not treating it as an afterthought.
And that's such an important message. I think a lot of us get caught up in that always-on mentality, thinking we have to constantly hustle to get ahead.
Yeah, like there's no other way.
Right. But this podcast, it reminds us that rest and self-care, they're not just nice things to do if you have time. They're essential.
They're not indulgences, they're investments.
Exactly.
It's like giving ourselves permission to slow down, to create a life that feels good, for the long haul.
It's about being present, being mindful, which is something we've talked about a lot on the show.
Oh yeah, it's about tuning in to how you're feeling, making choices that align with what really matters to you.
And recognizing that success is a journey, not a destination. There are going to be ups and downs.
The setbacks are part of the process.
Yeah.
It's about enjoying the ride.
I love that. So what resonated most with you from this podcast?
I think for me, it's the emphasis on the connection between our minds, our bodies, and our emotions.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
Like you can't ignore one without affecting the others.
It's a reminder to take care of ourselves on all levels, the whole package.
And it reminds me of something else we talked about. Community. We don't have to go through these challenges alone. Having those supportive connections can make all the difference.
Absolutely. It's about creating that space where you can be yourself, share your struggles, celebrate your wins.
I think that's a great place to wrap things up. We've covered so much in this deep dive, from burnout to building mental resilience to that idea of sustainable success.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
And I hope our listeners feel inspired to take these ideas and apply them to their own lives.
To create a life that feels authentic and fulfilling.
Exactly. So as we sign off, remember, your mental health matters. It's an investment worth making.
It really is.
And like they said in the podcast, a healthy mind builds a successful life. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep taking care of yourselves.